Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, I want to give you a background of my podcasting experience and why I now have a sponsor. Even though my other podcast, Low Carb MD, we've been doing it for 2 years. We have over 3 million downloads and we have no sponsors. Why? Because we agreed that we did not want our integrity to be challenged. We didn't want anyone to say, well, maybe they're talking about this stuff because of who's sponsoring them. It's all about money. We've taken a loss on the podcast for 2 years, right? But financially, but we've helped a ton of people. And that's why we're doing it. It's not about slick marketing and trying to make a buck. I have a good day job as a doc, so I'm doing okay from that standpoint. But what I found is I was losing money on Low Carb MD and also paying all the production costs and donating my time for this podcast because I believe in it. So I had a discussion with Chris Cornell, who has done a lot behind the scenes to help out. And I saw that he had a relationship with Simply Snacking. And I said, well, Chris, why are you doing that? And he goes, Brian, you guys should really sit down and talk. I think you and Sue Kramlik would really like each other. So we set up a meeting. And within a second, I knew she was the person. Why? Because as a low carb doc, I'm looking for healthy snack opportunities for my patients. And so I said, hey, Sue, I'm looking at your products. Everything looks great. No artificial colors, no artificial flavors. It's real meat, grass-fed, grass-finished. Great. Why are you using coconut sugar? Isn't there another alternative that you could use? And she, in 2 minutes, explained to me the fermentation process of her snacks and why it's not beef jerky, but it's a soft variant of that. And it would be just slick marketing and dangerous to use artificial sweeteners or, xylitol or sugar alcohol. And she explained the science to me, and I said, oh, okay. She said it would just be marketing, and it wouldn't I would lose my integrity if I did that. I was like, okay. Great. Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit. And, really, I wanted to be straight up with her. And I said, look, this podcast is starting out. We have very few listeners at this point. And she said, Brian, it's not about the money. I want to support what you're doing because we need a positive message out there. So by this time, I was already biased because I had tried her products. And I'm telling you, my staff went nuts. They were all fighting over it, took it home, gave it to their kids. Their kids loved it. So, and I personally use it as a low carb doc. I've gravitated to 1 meal a day generally. And I've never been a shake person, even though there's great shakes on the market. Health Code being one of them that I really enjoy, but I just I don't have time, or it's a hassle for me personally, but for some people it's a great thing. And also I do a lot of volunteer work. So if I'm in the jungles of Guatemala, it's going to be hard to have a shake. So Simply Snacking for me, the reason I loved it was I could have it when I do 1 meal a day. My tendency is I'd be really hungry by the time I got home, and then I would be grabbing macadamia nuts or things really high in calories and low in protein rather than something more substantial, because I was at that point where I was just done and ready to eat. So I had 2 Simply Snacking, the low carb ones. I'm a low carb guy, so they go from 1 gram to 4 grams. The 1 gram worked great. I had 2 of those. I got home and I said, well, I'm not really hungry. Let's go for a walk and then we'll make dinner. Right now, I was surprised by that, and I've been doing that. So for me, I think as a snacking alternative, my frustration has been, and as a matter of fact, I was going to bring a product to the market, as a beef jerky that was 0 carb, made with a different type of sugar and salt. But the problem was none of the big manufacturers wanted to do it that way because they kind of knew what Sue knew, and that it wouldn't be appropriate or healthy, and there's risk of microbial infections and things like that. So that's what I loved about Sue. I knew that we were joined, and really what I wanted is something where, as I succeed, I make her successful, right, and help her along the way, because I appreciate it. Because there's episodes of this podcast I wanted to get out so bad, but I couldn't, just because finances were I'm paying for it, you know. So I have tons of recorded stuff that I just couldn't get to you, and I needed help. And so luckily Chris introduced me to Sue, and I think it's an awesome fit. Small farm. As a matter of fact, I wanted her to come on and explain all this stuff, and she said, "Well, we don't really have an internet that's great at our farm yet, but pretty soon we will." And I was like, "Wow, this is the kind of person. It's not this huge corporation where they're just making a bunch of unhealthy stuff and using slick marketing to trick people." So for me, there's tons of flavors. I would recommend going to the website, you know, and taking a look for yourself. I gravitated towards the lower carb. Someone like Chris can go for the higher carb because he's so fit and has so much muscle. And this is what I've been talking about on Low Carb MD. And also here, you know, a lot of the interviews you're going to hear coming up, Jason Fung, you're going to hear now, Sean Baker, you know, some of the great, Zach Bitter, some of the great athletes and great leaders in our communities. So that's why I wanted to give you a little background of how this transpired. And so she is making it possible. I'm not taking money home from the podcast. I'm not here to make a buck. As a matter of fact, my long-term goal, and Sue hopefully will help on this too, is to be able to make this into a charitable podcast, and where we can donate money to causes that we believe in, to guests that we have come on who are doing great things around the world to help people. And that's my heart down the road. But right now it's getting the inertia to get this started. So Simply Snacking, I'm very grateful to them for giving me this platform and to be able to share probably two extra podcasts that I wouldn't be able to share every month, at least 2 or 3. And, you know, I'll still fund some of them, and Patreon's going to support some, but having Simply Snacking behind me is a huge thing. And I don't want you to be sitting there for an hour listening to ads. So I'm going to be very selective, and maximum I would have 2 sponsors. And just so you know, we've turned away sponsors over the last 2 years, left and right, because they didn't meet the criteria that I set forth. You know, my integrity matters, and I want a company that I believe in, that believes in me, and we both win. And so this is that opportunity. It's a perfect fit. So sorry for the long rambling. I just wanted to make this clear to people so they understand where I'm coming from and how it transpired. And I am so excited about the content we're bringing you. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. Man, today's really special for me. This is a hero of mine, someone who really I credit with saving my life and really changing my practice, because one of my patients came rolling in and lost 40 pounds, and he talked about intermittent fasting. I was like, that's a dumb idea. It doesn't make any sense. Why would people not eat? So this person really has, and you probably already know who it is, so I can't trick you, but this person has impacted seriously more lives than anyone I know personally that I've met and sat down with. Every patient I talk to, they go, "Oh, I read this guy's book." Jason Fung, welcome, man. It's so great to have you.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here, Brian.
Yeah, it's just, you know, really for me, it was like, you know, when we started the Low Carb MD podcast, now we have over 3 million downloads. You know, I reached out to you and you're like, yeah, no problem. When I first started this journey, I reached out to you, emailed me and go, oh yeah, this is normal. Here's what you're going to expect. And so you took a lot of the concern and worries for me with regard to low carb and fasting and understanding it. And the more I'm in practice, the more I appreciate you, because I'm seeing the stuff you said working, you know, monitoring all this stuff. And so, you know, a lot of us know the science, we know what you've done, but like, I want people to know you, because as a side effect, as a side to everyone listening, I know more than you guys do, because with the Low Carb MD podcast, I'm a little upset with you, Jason, but we'll talk about that later. Because Jason goes, look, we're not going to take outside funding. We're going to be legit. We're going to have credibility. No one's going to question our integrity. And so that cost me intro money, right? And so, but it did. It was important, because now we have a little bit more standing in the community to say, look, these guys have put the money where their mouth is, and they've worked hard. And so, Jason, you were a big part of that. So that's why I take it personally when people criticize you for recommending green tea, which you've been recommending for years, or whatever dumb stuff. So like, I want to start way back at the beginning. It's like, okay, what's Jason Fung like as a kid? Growing up, were you the curious kid? Were you the guy who asked all the questions and everyone's like, oh my gosh, it's Jason coming. He's going to bug us again and ask us intelligent stuff. So tell me how you grew up, like mom and dad and life, and how that molded the person you are now.
Well, I mean, I grew up pretty, I guess pretty normally, sort of middle class Toronto. I grew up in Canada. So the only difference, I guess, then was that there weren't a lot of immigrant families where we were. There's a few Chinese people, but not the extent that there is now. It's quite it's pretty normal to see lots of Asian kids, Indian kids, Persian kids. Like Toronto is very, very multicultural, as is, California and stuff. But back then, this is the 70s, remember, it wasn't quite so much. So there's a lot less. So there's a few Chinese kids. So there's a bit of a, it was a different experience growing up then. But other than that, I mean, pretty normal sort of middle class. It was different though, because compared to sort of middle class now, I mean, it was all a lot different. Like the way we did things was just differently in the 70s. And that's not just middle class. It's actually, everybody is different. So everybody brought their lunch to school. So, we all brought a brown bag lunch, and there was no snacks, and we rarely ate dessert. It just wasn't that. That's not just something people did, right? And a lot of the eating out and stuff that we do these days which is pretty normal for most people. We didn't do that. It just wasn't as much. And I don't think it was just me. It was sort of everybody had the same sort of experiences. So it was not bad. And then, so I grew up in Toronto. I went to school in Toronto, and, fairly, I didn't really, I really struggled sort of between going into medicine and going into engineering, which I really liked. I actually really wanted to build like big jet engines. That was what I wanted to do. So it went right down to the wire to university between engineering and medicine. And I sometimes joke with my friends now that man, if I'd gone into engineering, because I was going to do systems design, which was the early precursor to a lot of the artificial intelligence and all that stuff that we do now. But this was back in the 80s. So it was very, very early. I would have been one of the earliest people in that sort of field. And I sometimes joke, because a few of my friends went in, they worked for Google and all this stuff. And I sometimes joke, man, I took a big hit when I went into medicine. It was like,
yeah, it's true. People don't realize that the cost and the residency and all the, being a nephrologist, you had to go through extra training, and all that money goes out. And I feel bad for the younger guys. Now I went to USC, so I'm still with these gray hairs, still paying my debt to society, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, people don't realize the sacrifice that goes into it in the hours and being away from family and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because you really put your career on hold. Like engineering, of course, was 4 years, then you're out. And then I would have moved to California, and then, been in Silicon Valley, which is what most of my friends wound up doing. But the thing is that you wind up with this whole pathway of, you try and get into medical school, residency, and then the whole thing. But it is very, I don't regret it sort of at all. I actually quite enjoy what I do, because you get to impact so many people's lives in such a positive manner. So that was sort of me growing up. It wasn't, nothing extraordinary.
What made that decision? What made you say, yeah, I'm going to pick this path? Like, you wanted to help people, or you thought there'd be security? What made you say, okay, medicine's that for me?
I don't know. I mean, is an interesting, like, the problem is in high school, you don't know anything about anything. Like it's, and then you're expected to make a decision. And of course, things change. The whole world changes in terms of technology. Technology becomes, of course, so much more important in our lives. So I don't know. It was just sort of, I thought it would be a bit more fulfilling as a career. That is, the interesting thing is that in medicine, you can really sort of change the world, sort of thing. Whereas if you're an engineer, you can do very well, but it's quite difficult to sort of do something that's going to change the world. Like you can make better jet engines, you can make better cars, but it's very hard to be that Elon Musk sort of figure that's going to really just change the face of everything. or Google or Facebook or whatever it is. It's just very difficult, right?
And back then, you didn't think you were going to be changing the world, man.
No, I actually just thought, well, I can make a difference to some people's lives, like the people that I care for. And that's you know, that's all I thought about. And I thought, well, okay, if the two are sort of roughly equal, then I thought perhaps it would be more satisfying to do that.
And I'm going to
So
make
that
the
was where.
assumption, I'm going to make the assumption that you were the smart kid in the class, always straight A student. And everyone's like, oh gosh, Jason's going to mess up the curve. Were you that kid?
I wasn't the top of my high school class, but I was near the top. I'd say. I mean, I always did very well, and I always had sort of a like. It was one of the. I enjoy sort of thinking about things. Like I really like this. The trying to understand a problem to its sort of fullest extent, as opposed to just sort of getting by. So, you know, that's why I sort of went the path that I did, is because I just like to get to the bottom of things, and you know, that's where it
And I assume you were the kid in the library studying hard, right? I went to,
came.
well, really, because I went to UC Irvine, right? And it was a high Asian population there, and I'd be in the library. I was basically the only Caucasian dude there. Like seriously, and all the other guys were all partying. They're complaining. It's like, well, study, my guys, work hard, study, work hard, right? So it's like I think there's a certain ethic that people have, a work ethic that helps us in med school, helps us to be the guys who like thirst after knowledge, or stay the course, not just flame out.
Yeah, I mean, it's also what you're used to. So again, you get in with a group of guys, and what happens is so in university, I wind up with a lot of the people trying to go for medical school, and of course, we sort of studied a lot, but we hung out. That's how we hung out, right? So we'd hang out at the library, we'd hang out at somebody's house, and a lot of times we were studying, and then in between, there's a lot of joking, and you know, you go out and get something to eat, and you hang out, and you play some games and whatever. It's all mixed in together. I mean, there's lots of time to do stuff. So, but you do wind up studying a lot because we had that sort of shared goal of getting into medical school at the time. So yeah, I hung out in the library quite a lot, but we also did a lot of other stuff. Like we did, you know, we did a lot of sports and stuff. So I wound up doing like through medical. I started very late, of course, because the problem was in high school, you know, I was mostly doing studies, but then once I got into university, we just had so much time. I wound up doing all kinds of sort of other stuff, like canoeing. I wound up doing a lot of canoeing, which was I spent a lot of time that. So I did this thing called flat water sprint canoeing, and I did a lot of dragon boating. So it was, but it was like a lot. It was like 2 to 3 hours a night, sort of 6 nights a week, sort of canoeing. It was a lot because those other guys who started in high school, of course, they all wound up going to like the Olympics and stuff, and the Canadian team and all that sort of stuff. I was way too late. I was like, you know, 10 years older than these guys. So
Well, that's cool. Do you ever get
a
out
bit.
canoeing now?
I'm not actually that close that I actually can do it, which is a bit of a shame. I actually quite miss it. So, but I did other stuff, right? I did stuff through, you know, through the years. And then of course with the kids and stuff, you wind up doing a lot less. And then now the kids are getting older. So I'm starting to pick up a few things again.
And I know you're doing snowmobiling. I've seen those pictures, man. That's cool. I've never done that. That's one thing I've never done. That's really cool. I go, that's cool. I can imagine Jason out there relaxing. And so you're not always working, always figuring out new books. And like, I don't know how you do it, man. I've been so impressed. I'm like, he has another book. Dang, it's like ridiculous, man. He's starting a new program. He's doing, but you know, that's part of it. How about if I skip forward to residency? You know, med school, you worked hard. I know this story there, but how about residency? Were you the guy like when doing rotations and you'd ask the professor a bunch of questions and go, everyone's like, I don't know what this guy's talking, because nephrologists are the smartest guys, really. Because you know, I would sit there and go, oh no, I hope they don't ask me about this glomerulonephritis stuff and all this crazy where everything absorbs. I'd always get screwed up on it. But were you that
Yeah.
guy that just goes, why were you questioning the system, going, wait a minute, oh, that doesn't make sense?
Not really, because at that point I'm still trying to figure out the sort of system, right? So it takes a while to understand sort of where the state of the art is, and then you go past it and say, well, what's wrong with this? How can we make this better? how can we understand this better, right? So I was drawn towards nephrology, and you're right. I mean, you go into internal medicine, so all the specialties of medicine have their sort of personalities, right? So the orthopedics people were all the jocks, right? And you look at Sean Baker, and it's like, yeah, obviously, right? He's obviously an orthopedic surgeon. That's just the way it was. And internal medicine was all the guys who were sort of wanted to think about stuff more. And then of the internal medicine, the nephrologists were really the ones who just like to think about stuff all the time. And then, so that sort of drew me quite a bit. The other field I'll say that drew me, though, which I very nearly went into, was oncology. I actually thought the whole question of cancer was just a very interesting question.
I mean, you should write a book on that stuff. Yeah, you got a book in
Yeah.
every area of medicine. I'm like, man, he's talking about oncology now. I mean, that just shows, when you start thinking about the problem differently and adjusting it. So I mean, you would be great in oncology also.
Yeah, I mean, oncology is a little different because they rely a lot on those big trials and stuff. But the actual science in oncology is probably far better. Like, they've made more progress than, say, nephrology, which I'll say that the field has moved very, very little in many, many years. It's actually quite static compared to, like, cardiology moves relatively quickly. Oncology is moving very quickly, but nephrology, we still think about the same sort of things. It's still an interesting field to me, but there's less new that's developing compared to sort of those fields. So yeah, I mean, it was sort of, I naturally sort of gravitated towards that just because I really like the all of that sort of thinking about it, trying to understand it, understand the electrolytes, understand the acid-base problems. So it was, that's sort of what made the decision to me. And then I went to UCLA for my nephrology because by that point I had been in Toronto actually for quite a long time. I did my undergrad, I did my medicine, I did my first 3 years of internal medicine there. So I was looking for a change. And it's funny because people say, well, UCLA nephrology, is that a good program? I'm like, I don't know, it's nice weather. So I just wanted somewhere sort of different. And it was actually a very
you
good
probably
program.
couldn't get into USC, so you settled for UCLA, right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I think so.
No bias on my part, man.
Yeah, but it was
I like
great. I mean, I
UCLA.
loved UCLA, and but it was interesting to me, again, coming out to the West Coast, because I actually only applied to the West Coast. I didn't apply to a lot of people from Toronto. They go to, like, the East Coast schools, which are very good, and the East Coast hospitals. But to me, it was no different. So I want to get an experience. So it's like, why would I go to Boston? It's like the same as Toronto, right? It's very intellectual. You think a lot, you work hard. And I think the reason you work hard is because the weather sucks, right? I
Yes,
mean,
you're studying all
compared
the time. You're like,
to,
yeah, I'll be
yeah.
inside. It's snowing. I'll be
Yeah, because in
inside too.
California, I was actually quite stunned because it's like, one, the weather's great, but it reflects itself in the attitude of the people because they're much more relaxed, and nobody's staying in. Like, in residency, like, I'd be working all the time till 6, 7 p.m. and then sometimes you'd go later, right? And nobody cared that much. But there, it's like, oh, you gotta get out, go to the beach, kind of thing. And it's like, oh, these people really know how to, like, that
You work
work-life
hard and you have some
balance
fun
sort of
and
thing.
enjoy it. Yeah,
Yeah,
having that life balance, and I
yeah,
think you're pretty dang good at that, right?
yeah. It was much better on the West Coast than the East Coast for sure. But then I wound up going back to Toronto just because my family's all here. So it's
And when was the moment when you said something's wrong here? I'm doing dialysis on these diabetics, and where did you get that desire to say, I got to do something different, or this isn't working, something's wrong here?
it was actually quite a bit later. So I finished in 2001, and then I probably didn't start thinking about this really seriously until kind of 2010 or something like that. So I'd been in practice for a little bit. And once you get into practice, you start to see how the world really works, how patients really sort of go. And the whole issue is that a lot of people just were not getting better. Of course, you're seeing all the effects of the obesity epidemic, which sort of translated into this giant epidemic of type 2 diabetes. And so I was seeing a lot of diabetic kidney disease. I was seeing a lot of obesity and stuff. And, that's where I really started to get interested. It was sort of the Accord study, which came out in 2008, and it took a while for it to sort of sink in. That was the moment that I really thought, okay, this is like a life-changing sort of study, because it tells us that what we had done for this many years, which is type 2 diabetes, which I treat a lot, of course. So for type 2 diabetes, we had focused almost entirely. So for my entire career up to that point, I was focused on getting that blood glucose down. That was the whole point of diabetic medicines. Give lots of insulin until they get that blood sugar down. And it didn't matter if you're on 100 units of insulin. If their sugars were high, you'd give them another 100 units of insulin, no matter that they gained like 50 pounds with that. And that's the way I practice. But what that study showed was that paradigm was not correct. Like, just giving more medicines to get the sugar down did not improve outcomes. And it was followed very closely by the VADT and the advanced study. So it wasn't just a fluke study. It was clear that this was the truth scientifically. And so what sort of stunned me was that as I looked around, at the commentary, at how, like, nobody changed their practice at all. The endocrinologists still did the same thing. They had no idea what to do with this study, so they kept making excuses for why this study didn't show what we thought it showed, which is that just treating the blood glucose didn't do anything for type 2 diabetics.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, the study showed that the more tightly controlled the sugar was, the worse the patient did.
Yeah.
But the question that you raise is, well, how are you treating the sugar? So you're doing it through medicine rather than lifestyle.
Yeah, and of course I didn't have that thought at the time. I just kept thinking. So that's, and nobody else, like nobody in the universities, they just kept, we can't explain this. We don't know why. We think that there's something wrong with the study. And I'm like, there's 3 studies. And now they, of course, have 15 year follow-up. And of course, the study holds. And they didn't think about very hard. So I thought, okay, well, this is like a puzzle. This is like a, it's an interesting problem. So that's where I started to get really into type 2 diabetes, which led me naturally to the question of weight gain. Because, of course, and I hadn't been particularly interested in obesity at that point, but it eventually occurred to me that the problem was, we were looking at the problem almost entirely incorrectly. And the thing is that we were telling people, and this was even on the website of the American Diabetes Association, I think it's gone now, but they're saying that type 2 diabetes is a chronic and progressive disease. And it was never true. So why would you tell people this? And it's because our treatments were so ineffective that it was a chronic and progressive disease. But it wasn't that the disease was progressive, we were just treating it wrong. So therefore we never got a hold of it. And, even if you think about diabetic kidney disease, the answer actually stares you in the face. It's diabetic kidney disease. So get rid of the diabetes, then you don't get the kidney disease. And then you say, okay, well, how am I going to get rid of the type 2 diabetes? Well, if you lose weight, you'll get rid of your type 2 diabetes. So there was your answer, right? It was obesity to type 2 diabetes to kidney disease. And we're so focused on treating the kidney disease or the blood sugars, which again, it took me a while, but then I realized that, hey, the high blood sugars is not your problem. That's the symptom. The disease is your type 2 diabetes, right? Your obesity leads to your type 2 diabetes, which causes you to have high blood sugars. So
well, and I'll jump in there, because this guy, you have no clue who I am, and I know you've helped a lot of people down the road all the time. And so I reached out to you. I go, look, you're like, it's not about the sugar, it's about the insulin. He goes, check, when you told me, look, when you get your next diabetic newly diagnosed, look at their insulin level, check it and see how high it is. I'm like, what does that mean? What should it be? And you're like, the guidelines are wrong because they're using sick people as the study. So that was my huge step, of realizing, oh my gosh, you have insulin. It's not that you don't have insulin, it's just not working in type 2 diabetes. And if you start checking people now, from you, I'm looking at Ben Bickman and his data showing the insulin goes up and up and up before you get diabetes. In 10 years, we can prevent this from happening. And you think, wow,
Yeah.
what kind of impact can we have now?
Yeah. And that was sort of what led me to keep going and say, well, the whole thing about the high blood sugars was sort of, that was way later. What happens first, of course, and everybody knew this, was the hyperinsulinemia. And nobody's thought that the hyperinsulinemia was the problem. They all thought it's this insulin resistance. But the insulin resistance and the hyperinsulinemia are actually the same thing. They just don't, people don't see it that way. They think something's causing this insulin resistance, and therefore you get the hyperinsulinemia, which is compensation. And
Well, I
then they
can
go,
tell you,
well,
yeah, and I can tell you, man, for 15 years of my practice, I never one time checked insulin. No one
yeah,
ever said to check insulin until I talked to you and go, okay, let me look at insulin. Then I started checking and think, oh my gosh, right? And then Ivor Cummins comes along. Hey, look at all this other data that shows insulin's a problem. Like, oh my gosh, like then I
yeah.
start checking and think, oh my gosh, all these guys who have heart disease and all these other problems have high insulin levels, right?
It's true. And when you get down to it, it's the hyperinsulinemia that's really the core problem, because everybody calls it insulin resistance. But the problem with calling it insulin
Mhm.
resistance is that then you have the question, what causes insulin resistance? And then you get all these things. It's this, it's this, it's this, it's the dietary fat. It's like, well, why don't they actually cause each other? So they're actually sort of two sides of the same coin. But if you call it hyperinsulinemia, then you say, okay, well, the problem is too much insulin. How do you lower insulin? And then the solution becomes very much more clear, as opposed to calling it insulin resistance and then saying, I don't know what causes the insulin resistance. So, just changing the terminology and calling it hyperinsulinemia as the problem actually takes you a long way to figuring out how to treat it. And the issue, of course, was that there was no real, at the time, good pharmacologic ways to deal with the hyperinsulinemia. I mean, it's the same thing that you see now with the SGLT2s, right? So these are medications where you urinate out the glucose. And in type 2 diabetics, the side effect of urinating out all the glucose is that you're going to reduce insulin. That's a pretty that's pretty obvious, because you don't have as much glucose, you don't need as much insulin. So your insulin levels are going to go down. So this is one of the first drugs that we see where insulin levels actually go down. And the studies, now they're finding, holy cow, there's this incredible benefits of these drugs in hyperinsulinemic states, because now you're seeing results in kidney disease. So you're getting reductions in dialysis and progression of microalbuminuria, like 20 to 30% reduction. Okay, the last drugs that did this were the ACE inhibitors that came out in the 80s. So the last time we actually had a drug that helped prevent kidney disease was close to 20 years ago. I mean, 40 years ago, that, this is the first class of drug that actually shows some renal protection. Then it turns out it reduces heart failure. Then it's a class effect. We see all these studies, it's reducing MIs, and everybody's like, why? Why does
While
it
it's
do
raising
this?
the LDL cholesterol.
While it raises, that's right. That's a
And
whole
no
other
one says,
story.
that's weird, right?
Nobody
So that,
ever says, yeah, that's right.
yeah,
And
but the
almost
side
does
effect,
nothing.
you get urinary infections, you get yeast infection, you have a lot of
Oh yeah,
problems.
there's a
So
lot of side
yeah,
effects, but as a sort of intellectual trying to figure out what's going on in the body, it's very, very instructive, because one, it does almost nothing for your A1C. Like, it reduces your A1C barely at all. It raises your LDL cholesterol. So the two things that we thought were the most important things as I was going to medical school, which is lowering blood glucose, lowering LDL, made no difference in this drug that is basically having huge beneficial effects. And everybody's like, what's the mechanism? What's the mechanism? Well, it's like, well, you don't have to be a genius. Your disease is too much insulin. This is a drug that lowers insulin. That's why you see huge, huge, huge benefits. And it's
and
insane
and
how,
also your analogy too with regard to, like, you're like, because I'm asking you, well, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I go, Jason, how's this? You're like, look, if someone comes in, they're drinking 10 beers a night, they can't get drunk. What do you tell them? 12, 14, 16? Or do you say, hey, why don't you cut off the alcohol for a little while? make the person more sensitive to insulin, then that little bit of insulin they have works. How do I make you more sensitive to insulin? Exercise, put on muscle mass, stop eating processed food, like all these things. And you say, wow, it's just like, this should be common sense for, like, it was like one of those weird pictures, like, you know, when you stare at it, you don't see anything, then all of a sudden it comes 3D and you see it, and like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Then for me, I mean, obviously, you know, the science, I think the big thing is, like, you can explain it in human terms where people go, oh my gosh, that makes sense. I get it, because my car runs this way. When you can explain, you can be brilliant but not explain things. That's the gift you have, is that you can explain complex things that us simple people don't understand in a way we get it and go, oh, okay, that's why you don't, you know, blow up your engine then change your oil. Doesn't make sense, does it? Like, people get that stuff, and you're the master of this stuff. But how did it, when you saw this and you start talking to your colleagues and they look at you like you have no clue what you're talking about? Right?
Yeah,
How did you
yeah.
persevere in that? When I know, when I first started knowing you, that they were making fun of you at certain conferences, and then all of a sudden you're the keynote speaker when I met you. I was like, how does that happen?
Well, I think it's because I really get into it. Like, I really spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and that's why it makes sense. It's just, you know, if you understand it at a deep enough level, then you can make it simple. Like, if you understand, like, it's like they say about the teachers and stuff. If you're able to explain it, then you know this person actually has a good grasp of what is going on. When they don't know, that's when you know they don't know what's going on. And so I had thought about these things for a long time. And then the other thing, of course, is that the benefits are pretty obvious once people start trying it. So getting people to try it is an issue. So fasting was the same thing. When I started talking about fasting or thinking about fasting, like, everybody thought it was like the worst idea they'd ever thought, like they'd ever heard about. But, the science was all there. It just got buried for a long time. This whole idea that you should eat 10 times a day, there was no science behind it. So when you actually dig through the science, you see, hey, when you don't eat, hey, look at all these good things that happen. And they're not going to happen in the 1920s because there was no obesity and the disease of hyperinsulinemia was not that much. Now you get to the 2020s and there's a ton of hyperinsulinemia. So therefore, this is an intervention which is much, much more effective because it lowers insulin. So the whole so I understood it enough. I had seen it enough in my patients, because the first thing I did was, of course, I recommended patients do it because this is what I do, right? And we saw cases that were just like unbelievable. Like, I could now. I mean, I see it reasonably often, but I had my own patients, right? It was a patient. I remember a patient that I followed for 10 years, just doing the regular thing. He had, he was on like 70 to 100 units of insulin, and he's a very meticulous guy. One of these guys that writes down every blood pressure, every sugar, does sugars 4 times a day, and brings in these, sheafs of paper showing you exactly. And so he was on tons of insulin. He wasn't doing any better, but that was the way that we did it. So I talked to him about intermittent fasting. He thought, okay, well, that sort of makes sense. He started it, like, honestly, within like 6 weeks. We got him off all his insulin, all his drugs, and his A1C was like 5.9, right? Whereas it was like 8.5 on 120 units of insulin, sort of thing. So it's like, whoa, like, this is like crazy. Like, I had been treating him this whole time completely wrong. Like, there's no reason that he should have been suffering all the damage that he suffered. And it was only because I didn't understand the actual disease. And that's what really sort of shocked me into, like, okay, I need to, like, one, start talking to people. But it's very hard, of course, if you're not in the university or like, people just think you're crazy. And certainly they thought I was crazy, but I had the understanding. I knew I had looked into it deeply enough. I knew that I had used it on patients, and some of these results were just incredible. I mean, it was ridiculous. Some of these stories, people with 25 years of diabetes, and it was all gone like in a month. And I'm like, oh, there's another guy I really should have treated 20 years ago like this.
Well,
But
and I'll
I
tell
won't
you,
let the next 20 go like
I'll
this.
tell you, seriously, the first video, I had a patient lose weight, and I think you know the story, and I saw this. I'm like, who's this Jason Fung guy? And I'm like, I remember watching your video, and I'm like, if he's right, I'm gonna be really mad. I'm gonna be really mad if this guy's right, because like I've been eating Melba toast and rice crackers and all this stuff, trying to lose weight, trying to cut my calories, and I was miserable. And I'm having green shakes. And I was like, if Jason Fung is right, and then I go, here, this is honest. I watch and I go, okay, at the end of the video, if he's selling something, I'm done. I'm not going to even pursue this. Right? You weren't selling it, and the guy even asked you, he's like, if fasting's so great, how come no one's doing it? And you're like, there's no money to be made. There's no drug. There's nothing I could sell you. And I was like, okay, this guy's legit. And that's how I emailed you and reached out. And so it's crazy how life is so different, because how many of my patients I'm seeing what you taught me, and I have people on a ketogenic diet. This one guy in particular, I just presented on 260, 270 sugars, getting him off glipizide, getting him off all of his toxic meds. And he was coming down slowly, but like really slowly. So I was like, let's fast for a day. One day of fasting, 70s and 80s sugars flat. I was like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, Jason, thank you, man. Like, you saved this guy, right? Because otherwise we
Yeah.
say, let's put you on insulin. Like, that's what they wanted to do with him. And we kept that from happening. And now his sugars are 70 to 80. He feels great. He's working out. He's lost all his weight. And what's funny is a lot of people will tell me, it's like, oh my gosh, doc, if I knew you 10 years ago, I was like, 10 years ago, I didn't know Jason. I would have done the same thing that your other doctors did.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have
Yeah.
known, right?
We wouldn't have known. And the part that sort of bothers me is that, so I wrote the obesity code, then I wrote the diabetes code. So diabetes code is much more specific to type 2 diabetes, which is actually closer to what I treat every day. Because I see the end stage, of course, as a specialist. But so that was published, I think. So it's at least 4 years now, right? And if you look at the teaching of medical school and what new doctors coming out do, there's nothing. Like, even though I'm trying to get the knowledge out there, like it's just not getting through. People are still like, oh, take your insulin and eat 10 times a day. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like, it doesn't work. It's never worked. Like, none of that has ever been shown to work. And the studies to prove that were from 2008, because the cord was 2008. And here we are 12, 13 years later, and the best sort of universities are still pumping out people that just want to increase insulin. And it's like, oh my God, like this is crazy. But of course, they're very hard to convince, because if the universities are very tough, because they think that if they didn't come up with it, then it's wrong, because they're the experts. So it's really hard to get through to them. And so I remember I did some lectures at the university, and then when they're listening, they're like, yeah, this all makes sense. This all fits together very nicely. And then they get out there and they start talking to their friends. And I remember one person who was a friend of mine, she goes, yeah, I thought it was all right, but then I talked to my other colleagues and they just debunked it all. I'm like, there's no bunk here. It all works because patients get better. Like, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Your patients don't get better when they go to see the specialist and get put on insulin. And they do get better when you fix their diet or put them on fasting or whatever. And and just to touch on that whole green tea thing, I mean, this is sort of an interesting thing, because I actually talk about conflicts of interest sometimes. And and then they say, well, you
No,
promote green
you don't
tea. I'm
talk
like,
about it. You're a lion, man. I'm like, oh, Jason, dude, I don't want to mess with these guys. Good luck, dude. Right?
well, yeah, it's crazy, because it's
It's
like,
nasty.
okay,
There's some nasty stuff that we've seen, and it's amazing when it's hard to hold your tongue when you see corruption and you see
yeah.
blatant, where people are going to suffer because of this.
Well, the problem is that the pharmaceutical industry has their claws into most of the academics. And so they pay them a lot of money, and they do studies, and they get free this and free that. They take them on trips for here. So these pharmaceuticals will do that. And I think the big part of that is the drugs, because the drugs we're the gatekeepers for drugs. So you need a doctor to prescribe a drug. That's how we got into this whole narcotic thing, with the Purdue and so on. So since the doctors prescribe the drugs, you need the doctors to, you wine and you dine the doctors and they prescribe the drugs. And that's where the corruption happens. You know, so for the green tea, they go, oh, but you have green tea. I'm like, yeah. It's like, I think green tea is healthy. I'm not sure what you think is wrong with that. Like, so the reason that the whole way that came around was that at the time, you know, I was promoting the fasting, and there's actually a little bit of evidence that green tea is useful in fasting. It has these catechins, which might suppress the appetite a little bit, but it's a good drink anyway. It has all these, you know, useful things, and a bit of caffeine, a bit of these catechins, which might suppress the appetite. And so that's why I went to this peak tea company to tell them, okay, we need to make a fasting tea because I want to have people that they can drink something. So we partnered up, and that's what I have. And I have a company that promotes fasting as well. And I have a company that does the books and consulting.
And it's
You
a
know,
tool.
so
It's a tool that
it's,
you use that's valuable
yeah,
to what you're doing, right?
exactly. So I'm like, okay, so I'm not sure, like anybody can prescribe green tea. You don't have to buy my brand. You can buy whatever brand you want. I still recommend all green tea. Like I don't own Lipton's. I don't own Tetley's, right? I'm not the owner of Tetley. My name is not Jason Tetley. So, you know, it's like, I'm not the gatekeeper for green tea. I think it's a great drink. I drink green tea almost every day. You know, as part of the way I grew up. Actually, I drank a lot of tea, but I drink tea almost every day, and I drink coffee almost every day too. But there was no need for me to make a coffee, so didn't make a coffee. But nobody says, well, you recommend coffee. It's like you're corrupt. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Well,
But no, it's
the
like,
double standard is so blazing, you know,
I
blatant,
know.
because a lot of the vegans are getting paid by the blueberry industry, by the cherry growers guild or whatever, you know, those kind of things, and no one says a word. No one says a
Yeah,
word, but that's in alignment. I'm
yeah.
like, hey guys, if they're in alignment with what you believe, I don't have any problem with that. Just
But it's
disclose it.
okay. I mean, if you are, if you think blueberries are good for you, and I do, um, th- that's fine, right?
Yeah, it's not a
We're
conflict of
not the
interest.
gatekeepers. It's not a conflict of interest. It's what you believe, and so you know, somebody wants you to do some consulting for a blueberry company, and you do it, and you say, I think blueberries are great, and that's great. Where it's a problem is where drugs are concerned, because only we can prescribe drugs. So therefore, if a drug company is influencing us to prescribe more drugs more than they're necessary, that's a problem. You know, telling people to have more tea or more coffee, or, you know, eat less sugary foods, like there's no real conflict of interest there, right? So
Yeah.
it's funny that people always say, oh, but you prescribe, you promote green tea. It's like, yes, it's been drunk for thousands of years, and I worked with a company to make a tea that you know, it's actually, the way it's done is different than regular green tea, but it's not anything different than you could get at your supermarket, where there's 10 different brands, and I don't have an interest or anything. It was just because that was part of the promotion of fasting, that's what my company does,
Exactly.
right?
It
Because
just
again,
develops on that. So you look at it and you go, okay, look, it's not a conflict of interest because you're helping the patient get healthier. Now, you know, the thing is, we've talked about before, the ADA is in a tough position because on one side they have the farm, and the other side they have food. Each one is fine with the other one flourishing, right? Processed food. And it's not that they're
mm,
bad people, they're just business people. Like you've called that out. And I say, look, if I invent something to clean up oil spills, I want them to drill like crazy and be crazy and do crazy stuff with their oil rigs, right? Because I have a product that I
yeah.
make money to clean it up. So I think when they say, "Oh yeah, drill like crazy," and it's the same thing, eat whatever you want, and we could take care of it with this drug, instead of saying, "Why don't we cut both of those out and see what happens?" Right? And that's
Yeah.
our mindset.
And I actually think, like, some people say, oh, you're really anti-pharma. It's like, no, 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 no. I actually don't think that pharmaceuticals are the problem. I think the problem is that the pharmaceuticals are allowed to pay the doctors, who are the ones who control it. And it's no different than having gangsters who pay the police, right? One is supposed to protect, so the police are supposed to protect the public. We as doctors are supposed to protect the public. We tell them what's good for them. So you can't be in a position where you're in conflict. That is, some drug company wants doctors to prescribe more drug, which might not be good for the health of the population. But what they do is they spend a lot of money, they influence our what we do. They take us, and this is a big open secret. Like, you know how much free stuff used to have? Like, I don't do any of it anymore, but it did
Yeah, we can't get
happen
a
a
pin anymore, but
lot.
yeah, they used to do golfing and lunches
Yeah,
and
but there's other
yeah.
ways to get around that. So now they go and directly they pay these guys to do talks, right? So there used to be all this free stuff for everybody. Now they cut it out. So that actually the people in the community are probably the least conflicted. But now the most conflicted people are the university people, because
Well, it's the thought leaders. The thought
yeah,
leaders
the
are
thought leaders
influencing the rest of the
are
frontline doctors.
heavily
Yeah.
influenced, because and there's all this stuff you can read about it, because what their plan is that they get a doctor who they identify. Oh, this is a doctor at this and this university, and he really likes our product. So not that he's smart, but he really likes our product, and that's probably because there's probably some reason why, but he likes the product, so let's give him money. So you give him a research grant. The university works for is like, well, look, this guy's getting big money from big pharma, so he's going to get promoted because he's bringing in the cash. And then then the pharmaceutical says to this doctor, okay, let me pay you $2,000 to go and give a talk, and it's a talk for 10 other doctors at the fanciest restaurant in town. So you're not supposed to do that, but it happens all the time. And $2,000 for like a night. And it's actually, you just go and they prepare the slides for you and they tell you what to say. And you just go there for an hour of your time. You have a fancy, fancy dinner with some colleagues. You give a talk and you get $2,000.
Well,
And people do this all
and
the
you
time.
I saw you tweeted something not too long ago showing the health minister saying, "Oh, I don't even know what's in here. I just read what they tell me to say." Like they don't even
Yeah.
research it. Like you look at that and say, "Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's our responsibility. We can't just hand out stuff, whatever it is, without looking at the risk and
Yeah.
benefit of every
Yeah.
treatment we provide." Right. So that's
Exactly.
that's a
It's a
problem.
huge conflict, because if you're this doctor, now you're getting $2,000 a pop, and some people do this sort of like 10, 20 times a year. You're getting sort of like $30,000, $50,000 a year from the drug company. Your opinion of this product has now shot way up, and they track it all. So they track how much prescriptions go up when you give a talk, but their target is not the actual doctors. Their target is actually the doctor giving the talk. Like, they don't actually care about who goes.
Well,
That's
it's
why
also the
sometimes,
commercials influence the consumer to go to the doctor and say, "Hey, what about this product?
yeah,
It looks great on TV. I love the ad." They don't see that last second that shows that you could die and your leg falls off and you go blind and all the other stuff that they would say real quickly with small print. But
yes.
Jason, I'm not gonna let you escape me, man. With knowledge, your knowledge base, that's clear. What about, was there ever a moment when you said, I'm done with this. I can't, I'm not dealing with the BS stuff. Like the most frustrating thing for me when I know I'm right and people all say you're wrong. I'm like, okay, here's my results, right? You had results. And so to sit there in academia, I've never had to deal with academia necessarily, but did you ever get to a point where you go, this is just isn't worth it anymore? It's not, the
um,
message isn't getting out.
yes and no. So the one thing that is very, so I'll say that the way I started is that, one, I wasn't getting anywhere with any of the academics. Like, they clearly just don't know what's going on. They don't really care either. They're in their own world. They like to believe what they believe, that they're the smartest people in the world and nobody else knows anything. And so therefore, these people on Twitter and stuff, they're just useless. So that's what they believe. So you try and go in there and you try and change their mind, because really they're the ones who are going to influence official guidelines. They're going to influence, the teaching of dietitians. They're going to influence the teaching of new students and stuff. So that's the first place I started to go. But of course, as a relative outsider, but even as an insider, because you can see David Ludwig and stuff, he makes little progress, even, and he's a great guy and he's a
Great
Harvard
guy and a nice
professor
person.
and
He's not going
everything.
to raise his
Yeah.
voice and yell at people.
Yeah, but you
Yeah.
can see
Yeah.
he's not making huge progress in terms of changing the minds of the rest of the academics there. So you get to a point where you say, okay, forget it. That's it. There's no reason to spend my energy trying to convince academics of another way of looking at things. So that's why I said, well, I'm just going to tell people directly, because my job is not to make the doctors smarter. My job is to make people healthier. So I will take the message and I'll just go through different channels, which luckily there are now, to tell people, hey, think about this differently and you can get healthier. And if they can listen to me, they cannot listen to me, it makes no difference. uh, because in the end, I'm just trying to help people. So you go out and you do things like podcasts, you do things like books, blogs, YouTube videos, which I'm doing now. And they're basically ways that you can get your message out, and a lot of it for free. Like books, yeah, you have to buy, but if you read the blog, it's free. If you watch a YouTube video, it's free. And so then you can make your message available to anybody who wants to listen, and people who don't want to listen don't have to listen. It makes no difference. There's lots of people out in the world. And so that's sort of where I put my energy now. It was very like to try and go, and we did this with the Journal of Insulin Resistance, and we're trying to, get more into the academic side, doing case reports and all this sort of stuff. They just ignore it. Like Verda did that, right? They did a big study. And of course, all the academics basically say, oh, this doesn't matter. They're like, okay, well, what do you mean it doesn't matter? These are real people who have been helped. Like, it's a real thing.
What
They're
they
like,
call an
no.
anecdote, we call a life, right? That's what
Yeah.
we see. We see lives change. We see people getting better, and like,
Yeah. So
you
so
know,
so you see that it's I have little faith that the academics will actually make lives better with what they're doing. They like to make their own lives better for the most part.
so
But
what's your, when you're driven, is it saying, hey, look, I want more people to reach more patients. I want to change the system. I want to change the world,
yeah,
because you've changed the
the system is not gonna change for me. What I put my energy on and what revitalizes me is is helping people. Like when you put your message out there, and it really is important that you send it out on a blog, for example, which turned into the books, but you can send it out there and all the blogs are still there. They're all free. And somebody will read it and somebody will say, okay, well, that makes sense. Or at least I'm going to give this a shot. And then I get these emails sometimes and they're like, oh man, I did this. I got off all my meds. My doctor doesn't even know what's going on. And I'm so much healthier. I dropped 6 medications and my sugars are now normal. It's like, that's amazing, because that's exactly what I've been trying to do this whole time. It's like, but you can't do it from within the system. You want the doctors to be an integral part of this change for making life better. And unfortunately, the system for the doctors is not built to change,
when,
even if you see, results that are sort of jaw dropping.
yeah,
So
and that was it, Jason. I have patients. There's a big HMO plan that has 8 minutes per patient, and they get sicker and sicker, and they get more and more drugs, because that's all you can do in 8 minutes. You can't educate someone that quickly, right?
yeah,
So the patients get sicker and sicker. I think at last count, 72 patients from this system that they're paying me to see me. And they're
yeah,
going back to their doctor. Their A1C goes from 9.8 to 6.2. We know what that means for mortality in the long run. Their waist size is coming down. All their numbers are better. Triglycerides go from 500 down to 100, and the doctor has no curiosity of what happened. They don't say, what
yeah.
in the world are you doing? This is
I know.
incredible.
It's
Blood pressure
crazy, eh?
normalized, off meds, and they go, oh, okay, we'll see you in 3 months. It's
Yeah,
crazy. It's
it's
crazy
crazy.
to me that there's no curiosity, because that patient sparked my curiosity enough to reach out to you, and I'm doing what I'm doing now. And just yesterday, I was driving and I was thinking, my statement for medical, what do they call it, your personal statement for medical school? I'm like, I'm living that. I
Yeah,
wasn't living that before, because I was working
exactly.
14 hours, stressed out, tense. I'm not helping anyone. And this is like, that's why the suicide rate among physicians is the highest in the world right now of
Yeah,
any
yeah.
profession. We passed
Because
dentists
what
even, right?
that's a bad stat right
Yeah.
there.
Well, the
Actually, my
dentists only
brother's
work
a
3 or 4. I
dentist.
know you dentists out there. I have friends and they tease me because their med
My
school
brother's
loans
a
are paid off,
dentist.
and their dental school. They make more money than we do, but still, man, it's not about the money too, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's really one of the things that really burns you out, is when what you're doing doesn't make people any better. Like, I'll tell you, you can work twice as hard, but when you see people getting better, you just keep throwing yourself into it because it's like, it's a great feeling. It's a great feeling when people get better. When they get off their meds, when they're like, oh, I lost all this weight, and it's a terrific feeling, and that's why I've sort of so what burns me out is sort of trying to educate the system, sort of thing, and what really sort of revitalizes me is just going back to sort of the basics, which is just helping people, and that's why, and it's lucky in a way that I'm in the age that we're in, where I can just go out and write something and send it out there, and it'll be free to read, or you can go to the library. And now, I'm focusing on a different medium, which is YouTube, and I can make a video and I can send it out there, and people will learn something, and hey, maybe they'll change their lives. And I'm sharing stories and stuff. But again, that's why I don't have to worry, because like you get a lot of haters. There's a lot of haters out there. So I get flack all the time, but it doesn't matter. Like, you could hate me, and lots of people do. I get a lot of this, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's like, I don't really care what you think, because I can see the results that I'm having on people. And so that's all I need, right? All I need, and I block them usually, because who needs that, right? People are so like, they're so negative. And this is one of the things I really appreciate about you, Brian, is that your message is always very positive. Like, there's so many people out there who are like saying, oh, this guy's so stupid. It's like, it does nobody any good to throw out all that negativity,
Yeah,
especially on
yeah,
social media.
and
Like,
that,
what's the
and
point?
not only that, it's what I don't like is the wolf mentality, the coyote mentality, where someone makes a dumb mistake and it's clear they made a dumb mistake, but everyone attacks them. Like, okay, the point's been made. He probably gets it at this point. You know what I mean? Like you have
Yeah.
300 people saying the same thing. It's like, okay, the guy messed up. I mean, that's why I don't like cancel culture, because I'm going to say something dumb. I mean, I know I have that, right? Or I've said the wrong thing and I realize, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Maybe that wasn't cool. But, you don't want to be canceled. Like, if you and I agree on everything and we disagree on one topic, I think we don't cancel each other and go, okay, I don't like Jason. Because if you're respectful and we have like I always say, if Jason Fung and I disagree, or Ben Bickman and I disagree, take their word for it, and then I'll figure it out later, because I'm wrong, probably, right? That's just my disclaimer, because I see you guys and your integrity, and that's why I followed you, and I saw the results. And I think there's things that are very important in life. I think we want to make an impact and we want to have a legacy. And there are some warriors, like Sean Baker's a warrior. I did an interview with him that like stunned me to see the substance of that guy. Like, there's way more under the hood than we ever could understand. And that's why with you, I want people, like, everyone knows you're brilliant. They know this stuff, but as a person, I know you're a family guy, and I want people to see that we're just not doing podcasts and writing books, that we go home and we want to love our family and we want to make an impact on the world and all those things. And I think sometimes people, like, their judgment on people like you who are successful, they go, oh, he's just doing it to make money. It's like, you know how much sacrifice he's done? Do you know the story that when I was starting out and I was so busy working 14-hour days, you're trying to send me patients and I couldn't see him because I was too busy. I couldn't get him in because I was overstressed. And so I was going, hey, Jason, if I send him to this guy, you may lose money, because you're referring to me. Let me pay you at least, or whatever. And you're like, if it's helping the patient, it's not about the money. And people don't know those stories.
Yeah.
I know the story because I saw it and I got the email sitting here if they don't believe me. So knowing integrity and wanting to help people is like, okay, a couple bucks, what that's going to do, right? Because I said, I'm just going to ship them off to this other guy to see him. But they came from you, right? Because they're seeking you out and they can't get to you. So they want me as a third-rate guy to be the Jason Fung. But, but that's integrity that people don't see, and if you do the fasting method and you could help a lot of people, you make a few bucks doing it.
Yeah, I
Guess what?
mean,
You've sacrificed to make this happen.
but the thing is that there's, it's interesting, because it's like, people say that, oh, you're just doing that, especially about people who write books or something. It's like, oh, you're doing it just to make money. It's like, okay, first of all, the book business is a horrible business. It's a terrible, terrible business for the most part. Like, you have a few people, the number one bestsellers who sell, honestly, they make a lot of money. And because they make a lot of money, nobody else makes any money. That's just the way the business works, right? It's the same goes in film. Like, there's a few, George Clooney's, and there's like 10 million people who are waiters. So the book business is a terrible business, but it's a way to get your point across. And it's like, it's always funny to me that people say, oh, you're doing it to make money. It's like, that's interesting. That's reason that I have all the free stuff, all that free information that's out there, right? So
Tons of
you
it.
could get
Yeah.
everything that I talk about for free on YouTube, on my blog, right? So I'm not asking anybody for any money. I just want people to do better. Now, I do have a company, The Fasting Method, which is a paid program. Why? Because we have to pay people. Like, we have people who work there to upkeep the website. So if I did it for free, they'd have to work for free. So, well, that doesn't work. So, you know, so there are things that you do have to charge for, but you don't have to do that. So it's like a community. Thefastingmethod.com's got courses, and you have to pay people to make the courses. You have a website, you need to pay people to make the website. So you have to charge money for that. But if you don't want to pay for that, then don't pay for that. Go to my blog and dig it up yourself, because there's like 6 years worth of blog posts that you could dig up for free. There's
And YouTube
videos
and
that I'm
talks you've
making
done
now
and
on
all that
YouTube that
stuff,
you can go on free.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all the talks, all the like,
And that's all time.
and a lot are on YouTube as well. So
and people don't realize that's time away from your
that's all
family and
time.
friends and stuff. You could be writing 7 books in the hour you're talking to me right now, probably. But you know, people don't realize how much of that time and effort, like even the podcast, Tro and I were talking about, I'm like, Tro, we lost $1,000 last year doing a podcast. We have 3 point something million downloads and we lost money. But you know what? I get to talk to you. I get to talk to Professor Noakes. Is that worth it? Heck yeah, man. Are you kidding me? I learn from all you guys. And that's why this podcast, I don't mind taking a sponsor, because I'm not going to compromise my integrity. If it's something I use and I love, and it's green tea or something like that, and someone's dumb enough to give me money to do this, what I love to do, then and it's in alignment, I have no problem. But Low Carb MD, we all agreed we're not doing that. So, but you know, the point is, look, there's sacrifices Tro's made, you've made, I've made. You know, we spent a lot of time figuring out names and doing stupid things behind the scene, but we got to spend time to get. You kept us from being the keto quacks, but as a matter of fact, that's what Tro and I were going to call it. So, you know, those kind of things that people don't know. So I don't want to keep you, because I know you're a busy guy.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is on social media, which is always, to me, one of the big, like, it's especially in the last year, there's just so much name calling out there. It's honestly, like, if there's a lot of people who like don't agree with something, and if you don't agree, you don't agree. That's fine. Like, we all have different opinions. But what it really shows about the person sort of name calling, and there's a lot of these people who claim to debunk me and stuff, right? I'm like, I don't really care what you say. You can not agree with me, but they're always like, they always wind up devolving into sort of, he's an idiot or something like that. And
no, I've seen that over and over, and I take offense to it. I can look and go, this guy's, it's hard when the idiots call you an idiot and you can't say, it's like, I'm not engaging this guy, really, because they don't understand.
Yeah, they just don't understand, and that's fine. I was there too. But the point is that when you start doing stuff, what it does is it shows more about the person calling names, the person who does the name. It shows more about the person doing the name calling than it does about the person he's calling names about. Because the person he's calling names about may or may not believe what he believes, and it may or may not be wrong. We've all been wrong. That's fine. But what it shows about the person calling the names is that they're intolerant and, just not a very nice person. I mean, you see this all the time.
Well, and that's
the
that's
problem,
it, man.
of course, is that,
yeah, that's
well,
it.
you get a lot of
I've
likes by doing that.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
It's
so
the Jerry Springer effect.
You get the likes, and
it's the Jerry Springer effect. You fight and you call people idiots, and people want to see that. My people, like, if I see that, right? I don't follow the person. I have a lot of people that have 10 followers, but they're great people. I don't care how many followers you got. If you're decent and kind, and I see you putting good stuff out, cool. You could be the brilliant scientist, and if you're a jerk, and there's a couple of them that I just said, no matter how brilliant you are, you're an idiot, and you're fighting with people, and you're negative, and I don't need it. I really don't. So I think that's a part of it. We start seeing that. And you've been above the fray, and I see you go, okay, I'm not going to engage this, and I'm not going to engage it either. And Dr. Unwin's not going to engage it. And, most people some people love the battle. Tro loves the battle. I'm like, okay, Tro, be careful, man. Cause some of these are nasty people, man. I mean, really, I'd rather just say, okay, whatever you think, man. Tro, if you ever have a chance, I interviewed a guy named Zuby. I don't know if you know that he's a rapper.
He's a
brilliant,
funny guy. Like I see his stuff. He's
brilliant
a
guy,
great
man.
guy.
Just brilliant.
Yeah.
Oxford, Oxford grad, but he gets life, and so he's saying the same thing. He goes, look, right? It just treat people right, and attack ideas, but not people, because there's dumb ideas out there that we have to attack, but not the person, not the messenger, right? But hey, Jason, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna let you escape without giving me your wisdom, man. You're on your deathbed and you go, okay, Brian, here's what matters. Here's what's important. The Jesus moment. Like, what matters in life? What drives you? What's your life's best medicine? Where do you go when you're stressed or tense? How do you deal with the struggles of life? Because the reason I ask that is the reason I'm doing this podcast is so many people have given up. They've lost hope. They've lost their businesses, and I've been devastated by it. And when I talked about faith or hope, I got shut down. I got ridiculed on Twitter. I lost 800 followers one day because I said, I believe in God. And I lost 800 followers. Zuby lost 4,000 followers. So I said, okay, I don't feel so bad about it. But like, where do you go when you're like, the chips are down? I don't know if that happens to you. I bet it does at some point. But where do you go when like
Well,
life's trouble,
yeah.
or what gives you
I
wisdom, or what's
mean,
something that kept you going during the years?
well, the key, I think, and I think it's actually the same for most religions, is that you don't want to focus on yourself, right? When you get down, what helps you is not to help yourself. You need to help somebody else. That is the only thing that's going to make you feel good about you, right? And that's what a lot of religions do. So, it's not like I just made this stuff up. Like, all this stuff about charity and helping and giving alms and stuff, for those who don't know what that is. But that's the wisdom that was there. I mean, it's this sort of ancient wisdom that's been passed on and distilled into its sort of modern form. But when you help somebody else, what you don't realize is that you get all that back. Like, it's all comes back on you. So when you feel down about yourself, go help somebody else. What you'll find is that you start to feel a lot better, like a lot better. When you start to attack somebody else, you don't usually feel better. You just feel worse. Like, you might feel better for a minute, but you don't feel any better after a little bit. When you go help somebody else and say, look, let me help you. I know this, you don't know this, I'm going to help you. Or it could be anything, right? You could help somebody by giving them a meal, or you could help somebody, you can invite them. And there's these old traditions in other cultures where you invite people, strangers, into your home for certain things. And it actually is an incredibly rewarding experience for you, not the other person, not necessarily the other person. You're helping the other person, but you're actually helping yourself in huge ways that you don't even realize. And that's why I don't worry about the stuff that goes on, like, oh, this Jason's an idiot, and oh, he's just doing it for, I don't really care. Like, you can do whatever you want, right? I'm going to focus on helping other people because that's what makes me feel good. And I think that actually holds for everybody. And they don't even recognize that, how much you get yourself by helping others. Like, it gives you so much more, it gives your life meaning. Like, your life's meaning cannot be to sort of help yourself. It doesn't work. Like, if you're selfish and all you do is try and eat the best meals and, live your own personal best life without helping other people, it's going to be so empty and you won't understand why. You said, but I did all this to help myself. It's like, because you never understood that it was never about helping yourself. It was all about helping other people. That's the only way. And I think this is the way we are as humans, because we're social animals. And I think it's one of the reasons that this whole, this social isolation is actually incredibly damaging, is that it's breaking all that, right? You see this when people, with 9/11, and people will just help strangers and so on. And you see that incredible bond. So yes, they had this catastrophic thing happen in New York City, but they were stronger for it because everybody was helping each other. So I think that's the sort of key. And it's a message that really comes from religion, but it's not specific to religion. Like, it's actually a universal truth, but religion has embraced that more than anything else and really helps people sort of recognize that. Um, and I think it's a very important lesson that perhaps doesn't get taught in school or anything. Whereas, when you have, you get out there and you listen and stuff, it's probably one of the most important things. And you probably don't understand it as a 20-year-old. You need to have satisfied those sort of, you've built your career, you've got your thing. So it takes a little getting to, but that's what I would say, is that let's focus on helping each other. Forget about like tearing each other down on social media. That's useless. It's just going to make you feel worse about yourself. Focus on helping other people. If you think that helping other people is giving them knowledge, then give them knowledge. You don't have to say somebody's wrong to say that you're right. Like, I don't go, this guy's just an idiot. Like, I almost never put out stuff like that on social media, because it's not useful. Like, it comes back and just bites you, because it takes a piece of you out. And that's why I think all that negativity on social media is so damaging. Not to me, I don't care. I don't even see it because I block it. But it's actually all very damaging to themselves, and they don't even know it. Like, you're losing a piece of yourself, a piece of like you wanting to help other people. When you start calling people idiots and they're dumb and they're corrupt, and why spend your energy like that? Spend your energy helping somebody. That's what I think anyway.
Man, there's no greater words of wisdom, Jason. I mean, man, that's worth the price of admission. I get choked up, man, listening to you, seriously, because I remember the day, you probably don't even remember it, when you were in town in San Diego, and I'm like, Jason Fung, I'm going to have dinner with Jason Fung. And we hung out and we had low-carb pizza at my favorite place down here.
Yeah,
and
that's fun.
Brett Scher and all of us, and I see the picture, and I'm like, man, but we all knew we were in the presence of greatness. I'm not blowing smoke here, Jason, man. It is like real, man. That's why I'm excited to have you on, to be associated with you. I'm proud of what you do. Like, I just want you to hear that. And every day of my career, every day, someone comes in and I'll say, where'd you hear this? Jason Fung. I read Jason Fung's book. So what you're talking about, helping other people, you're doing that. These books are in people's hands and they're giving it to their friends and their neighbors. You're not making money on that. Sorry to tell you that, but they're handing it from person to person to person. They come to me and they said, I read Jason Fung's book. I'm like, then you get this stuff. You understand, right? Let me support you in that. So what you're doing, and I see the impact that we're gonna have some impacts. I'm gonna talk to you offline, but there's some massive stuff you're gonna do to help people that's outside of what you're doing now. And I think you're a guy who you've just brought a lot of healing, and you've prevented so much suffering that the person doesn't even know that they would have been suffering with dialysis and blindness and amputations and all this stuff. And by you reaching me and reaching Tro and reaching all these other docs, it's growing. The tide is turning. So your impact and the sacrifice and what you did, standing strong to the arrows, it's making an impact. So I thank you, man. Every day I'm grateful for you. I really am. There's very few people on earth that, you and I think Ben Bickman have had a massive influence on me as people, but as scientists and as like leaders, and, just throwing positivity and helping people. And that's my goal, man. I want to be more like you guys, as I grow up. And I'm older than you, man. I don't like to say that, but I haven't, if I compare myself to you, I go, oh crud, man, I got to get to work, man. I got some stuff to do. But really being in that exam room and being able to have the tools that you guys have all given me, right? You helped get the Low Carb MD podcast off the ground because we had to tie onto your, being known by everyone type thing. And you've always been gracious and kind. And I want people to know that. That's really important to me, that people know it's not about money. It's not about, we've never made it down. We've been a horrible business partners in the Low Carb MD, but we've impacted so many people. And I've been blessed by seeing people from other countries say, oh my gosh, I love it. I love when Jason was on. I love what he said. This spoke to me. And to hear that and to have that reach, man, in this podcast, this will change people's lives, because they're going to hear, look, love other people, be kind, be decent. You don't have to be religious necessarily, but just put this out in the universe and help people and help that guy who needs it. And that's what you did for me, really. And that I really attribute you to saving my life, because I was killing myself. I was running on a treadmill that was too fast and I knew it, and I couldn't get off. Right.
Yeah.
And so direct primary care, being able to do this kind of medicine, man, my wife says, you just can't wait to get to work in the morning because you're excited, right? I have my coffee with my wife and I'm not up at 4 a.m. anymore, and I get my workout in, and I'm chill. And so all these things, but I really, I want everyone to know my feelings towards you. And I know there's so many doctors appreciative of you. Everyone I talk to, I go, who influenced you the most? Jason Fung, right? I mean, it's universal. I just want you to know that. I know you don't need the ego boost, but I'm just telling you that what you're doing is making a difference, and we're greatly appreciative
Thanks,
of you. And
Thanks
everyone,
so much.
hey, we went long, but it's Jason Fung. We're going to go a little long. If I can get any second from him, I keep looking at the clock going, oh no, it's going to run out. I hate this. It's like a massage when it ends. You're like, oh no, dang it. I don't want it to be end. But Jason, thank you. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for all you're doing. And everyone, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Listen to what Dr. Fung's saying. Get his books, look online, look on YouTube, and a free video that he put on YouTube changed my life. So he has my highest recommendation. I don't know what that means, but it's good to be friends.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks so much, Brian. All right, take it easy.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.